Afternoon geographers, back with some more content. What I'm trying to do now is streamline that content journey for you to give you the most valuable content that will have the most impact in the shortest space of time. What I'm about to go through now is a way to plan your 20 markers in the human paper. So if you're not using this method to help you plan your 20 markers when you get into the exam, think about it, you could be leaving marks on the table. And we don't want to do that. And we've all been there. We've all been faced with a human geography 20 mark, and the response your brain immediately has is,
What? What?
What? What?
what? What do you want from me? So what I'm going to share with you is a trick that I learned a few years ago, and it's just basically getting to know the specification. The exam board, if you look at the questions, tend to write their questions from the Enquiry questions which are in the specification. So if as part of your revision process you can actually get to know the specification, and it will make the planning of your responses in terms of matching content to question a lot easier. Let's have a look at some examples. Corker of a question, okay? And it can really throw you off if you're faced with the prospect of a question where immediately the answer doesn't come to you. That's not how A-levels were designed. A-levels were designed to really test you and really test your ability to think your way through a problem. That's why one of the best skills you can develop over the next few days is the ability to critically think. Don't expect the answer to come to you immediately. You've got to break it down, and then you've got to really think about what content to include, particularly in a human geography paper. So let's think, what area of the specification does this question relate to? Evaluate the view that global organizations have been more effective in managing global economic issues than environmental issues. Let's have a look now.
So with the migration question that we've just seen, we can definitely identify it as Enquiry question 3 that we can see just here. What are the impacts of global organizations on managing global issues and conflicts? The issues we're talking about here are economic issues, and they're environmental issues as well. So it's not necessarily thinking about conflicts, but you know for a fact that you can bring in 8B.8 and 8B.9 there. In my head, I'd be thinking, I want to go for the IMF, World Bank, possibly the WTO, then my evaluation might be along these lines here. So I can start to construct my paragraph knowing that these are the areas of the specification that link to the question. The environmental side, thinking of these ones here as being my more successful ones, or maybe something like climate change being something that's unsuccessful.
Okay, so once we've then identified the area of the specification that we're working with, then we can start to go into the breakdown process. The view. Remember, when it's a view question, we agree to a certain extent and we disagree to a certain extent. You've got to go through that process. Then we start to establish what's the view on trial. We're putting the view on trial, remember, we're going into that courtroom. So with this particular question here, we're not just saying economic on this side, environmental on this side. No. What we're doing is we're comparing economic to environmental issues on this side. So as you saw from the specification breakdown that I've just done, economic issues. Some of our main economic issues that global organizations have solved are debt and poverty. Now remember the organizations that deal with these? So we saw it, didn't we? It's in 8B.8a. You can use our Bretton Woods organization. If you need a bit of an update on the content from that, I've done a video on these exact organizations, so go and check that out now. But we aren't done yet. Remember, we don't stop at the economic issues. What we're doing on this side is we're comparing successfully managed economic issues to environmental issues where the global organizations haven't been successful. Debt, in some countries, they've been successful, but in environmental issues, we could argue that that would make a really good comparison. Solving debt through the IMF and climate change through Paris. To a certain degree, successful. Not been so successful so far, particularly as we've got the US withdrawing from the Paris Climate Agreement. The issue of poverty, I'd say we've been quite successful. Yeah, there's a statistic that's been thrown around, hasn't there, that extreme poverty has been halved since the millennium. That, I would say, constitutes success at the global level. Versus deforestation in places like the Amazon. We've not been so successful at solving that issue, and deforestation in the Amazon, make no mistake, is a global issue. So we've covered what we need to on this side. Debt versus climate change. Successful economic management, unsuccessful environmental management. Successful economic management, unsuccessful environmental management. So this is putting that view on trial. We've presented the case on this side. So what about this side? Remember that skill of evaluation? It's all about the wheel of AO2. Let's just recap what that wheel of AO2 is. So we draw our ideas from the following. From these here. So we've got place, spatial scale, temporal scale, people, and uncertainties. So all the examiner's going to want to see is that you are critiquing your own arguments. So when we take this issue of debt being solved by the IMF, what we could do on the disagree side, what are my options for AO2? Timescale. So in the short term, the IMF do actually solve that debt crisis, but what about in the long term? In the long term, they can actually make things worse in some places. Because if you remember, the structural adjustment programs require austerity. Now, austerity can lead to long-term economic and social downturns, possibly leading that country to get into future debt. So we're questioning the degree to which our original argument is actually valid. What about with climate change though? Yeah, right now maybe it's not so successful, but what about the future? And then we can bring in that theory of the environmental Kuznets curve. That's all we're doing in this essay. All we're doing is we're questioning the original arguments that we're making. So on this side, we're saying, yeah, economic more successful than environmental. However, to what degree is that true? Let's try to disagree with that to a certain degree. Let's see if this method works with another question in another topic. Okay, so regen 20 markers. No one likes them. Remember, I'm still going to fly the flag for dangerous places. I really think we can make this happen. But until that time, we have to focus on regen. Let's go. Okay, once again, a corker of a question, but it involves us knowing which area of the specification this is from. Observe.
And yes, it even works with regenerating places too. So, as you can see, the government question we've just had is definitely related to Enquiry question 3. So you can zoom in here and think, right, government decisions definitely do impact rural or urban places. One of my paragraphs might be infrastructure investment, another might be housing, and another might be migration or the deregulation of capital markets, certainly if we're talking about urban areas. But then my evaluative paragraphs could be something along the lines of maybe local governments are more effective, or there might be other groups like developers, community groups. These are all possibilities, but I've got my content ideas a lot quicker because I can work out what areas of the specification they relate to, and I know the boxes that are around it.
Now we know that, we can go into our question breakdown. So as you can see, this is slightly different. This is an evaluate the impact question. We approach these differently to evaluate the view questions. On this side, we are going to go through what the impact is. But then on this side, we question that impact, and I'll go through some ideas when we actually break down the question and we look at some content. So as we saw from the video where I was breaking down the content in the specification, so we could use infrastructure on this side. Government, they're in charge of infrastructure investments such as transport infrastructure. That will normally lead to increased accessibility and connectedness, increased investment from business because of that increased connectedness, and that will lead to job growth. Thus, we have solved that issue of economic characteristics. With government, we can always go down the route of taxation and reinvestment into healthcare services, possibly improving health outcomes in some places. Could also go down the route of education. So we can't deny, can we, that government decisions do have an impact on certain places in terms of accessibility and connectedness, and definitely social outcomes as well. So that's going to be really important. Remember, when you're breaking down a question, you've got to look out for the social and economic characteristics. You must cover both, or the examiner may just give you half mark for only answering half the question. Okay, so on this side, once again, we're thinking about how do we actually evaluate, how do we provide balance in our response. One way that I usually teach my students to evaluate when you've got an evaluate the impacts question is decreasing the degree to which there is an impact in this particular place, or there's a greater impact from. So we're balancing it on two levels there. Okay, and once again, we can use our wheel of AO2 to try to come up with those balancing statements. Okay, so maybe we're going down the route of there are some places that don't benefit from infrastructure investment. HS2 is a prime example of that. So HS2 was planned to come up to the northwest where I'm based, and then that was axed. So there's only certain places where this impact will be realized. There will be certain places where this impact is not realized. So if we think about the spatial scale as well, maybe the impacts are only in the centre. Do those impacts move into the suburbs? Who knows, but it's another way that you can evaluate the impact. There's certainly a way that you can go with people. For some people, there will be positive impact. Others, there might be a negative impact. Or it might just be, can they access these impacts? Maybe we can go down the route of timescale. So in the short term, it might be that there's a positive impact, but in the long term, it might be that there's a negative impact. So in the short term, one of the positives might be, but in the long term, one of the negatives might be the devaluation of property, and you can definitely use that with or any kind of energy infrastructure. As you can see, we've got balance. But back to my original point, coming up with the ideas for content within these questions that we've looked at, both from Regen and MIS, has been from that knowledge of the specification. So once you know the specification, once you've got it in your mind's eye, it becomes a hell of a lot easier to start to plan out content to particular questions. You'll know more what the question wants from you. You will think in terms of specification content. It will start to increase that confidence in that unfamiliar situation in the exam and mean that you can increase the range of knowledge that you put forward, which inevitably leads to a high level response. So try it now. Take a few past paper questions and do them with the specification next to you, not your notes, with the specification next to you. That will increase that familiarity with the specification, and it will help you get to know how to use spec to question. More content coming soon. Thank you very much for staying tuned. Don't forget, tomorrow, this is tomorrow, 10 till 5, doing the all-day paper 2 session, which is an overview of the core content. That will help too. If you can combine that approach of core content overview, specification, practice questions, you're on to a winner for Thursday. Right, keep up the good work. We are nearly there.